Uh, Lesson 45. I forgot to change that number right there, but I did change the lesson, so we're all right. We're taking a look at bondage and restoration at the same time. Last week we discussed the fall of Jerusalem. We began to take a look at the historical background of this time. When Jerusalem fell, the Jews went into Babylonian captivity. And then when they came back from the captivity and they rebuilt the city of Jerusalem, this is the time frame that we're talking about. There was a lot of things that went on. It was a very important time. As a matter of fact, several of the things that we read about in the New Testament that we haven't read about so far in the Old Testament came into existence during this time of the captivity while the children of Israel were in Babylon. But I want to take a look at the times in which the Jews lived, what was going on, how the kingdoms were changing. It's good to understand this because the book of Daniel, he foretells these things, which has been, which has to do with the Babylonian Empire. He was living during the reign of the Babylonians. He said the Babylonians would be the superpower, and next would come the Medes and the Persians, and then he said after them would come the Greeks, and then finally the Romans. Now the Bible only discusses the first two kingdoms because that's the kingdoms that were reigning at the time the books of the Bible were written. The Greek Empire didn't come into existence till 331, which was after the Bible, God became silent and wasn't writing anything any longer. A brief history of the time is what we want to know. As far as the Bible's concerned, the Jews were subjugated to two empires, the Babylonians and the Persians. The time in which we're reading now, the fall of Jerusalem, is the reign of the Babylonians. Together they ruled the Middle East for about 300 years. I should go back there. 606, 331 BC. Jerusalem fell, at least started to fall in 606, and the Persians fell to the Greeks in 331. We want to see the general history. This is what's not recorded in the Bible. We call this the period between the Testaments, which by itself is a very fascinating study. I enjoy it a lot. For 400 years, you might say that heaven was silent. God did not speak to his people that we know of. That doesn't mean he didn't speak to them. He didn't speak to them that we know of because there's nothing in the Bible that God said during that particular period of time. But a lot of things happened. What you want to keep in mind, remember in Galatians chapter 4, verse 4, Paul the Apostle said something. What did he say, Ted? When the fullness of time had come, when all things were ready, God sent forth his Son. The fullness of time, God used the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans to get the world ready for the coming of his Son. They all contributed something to the time in which Jesus would come. The Greeks, for example, you almost had nearly a universal language that was spoken. And of course, the Romans did a lot of things. The Persians did a lot of things. Even the Babylonians did a lot of things to help prepare for the coming of the Christ. And that's what Paul's referencing in Galatians 4:4. When all things were ready. God is getting the world ready for the coming of his Son. And he uses kingdoms. He moves them around. He puts them where he wants them to be in order to do that. First, we want to take a look at the Babylonian Empire. It'll be brief, just an overview. Nebuchadnezzar, he's the main guy. He reigned for a period of 43 years. He was a brilliant man. He was a genius, actually. Daniel lived in Babylon for about 75 years. So he actually outlived Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. Daniel held a high position in government during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. And then after Nebuchadnezzar was replaced, Daniel maintained his position with the next king. And then with the next king, I think he went through 4 or 5, maybe 6 kings that Daniel lived through. And he reigned in a high position. So he was in a position to understand a lot. He was in a position to help the Jews a lot during their time of captivity. The fall of Babylon. This occurs, they conquered, they let the Jews go back to Jerusalem about 536 BC. Babylon is going to fall over time. It's the same methodology that most all nations fall. You go back and you study history, and nations make the same mistake. They start out strong, then they get worse and worse and worse. Paul said evil men grow worse and worse and worse. That's what happens. You go back and look at history, every nation, same thing, same story. It never changes. It's the same old song. And this is what happened with Babylon. Babylon was a strong, strong empire. But at the death of Nebuchadnezzar, you can watch as they start downhill. Evil Merodach, we read about him in 2 Kings 25. He reigned for a period of 3 years. He was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. This was Nebuchadnezzar's dynasty. His son, Neriglissar, he reigned for 5 years. He was the son of Evil Merodach. The next one is his son, Neriglissar. I don't know what his name is, but he only reigned for a very short period. This is the dynasty of Nebuchadnezzar. He reigned for a short period, and then the priestly party, they threw him out of office. They wouldn't let him be king. They put in their own guy. And this fellow, Nabonidus, this fellow they put in as king in place of the rightful king. And then he had a son we read about in the Bible. His name is Belshazzar. These are the kings that Daniel lived through, at least most of them. Well, all of them, actually. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Yeah, sure. He writes about Belshazzar in Daniel chapter 5, verse 22. These are the kings of the Babylonian Empire that he lived through, and plus there's going to be some other that follows them, or in between them. Belshazzar, he was the last king when the Persians defeated the Babylonians, when they conquered the city of Babylon. A Bible error. Most historians say that there's an error with the Bible right here. And the problem is Belshazzar, according to Daniel 5:22, is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. You can see that that's not true. His dynasty ended right there with Neriglissar. Nebuchadnezzar's dynasty ended. There's no doubt about that. Nabonidus became king. Well, he was not the son of Nebuchadnezzar. So how could Belshazzar be the son of Nebuchadnezzar? Bible's wrong. We proved it wrong. And you may read this on the internet somewhere. They always got stuff like that on there. What's wrong with their logic? I'll show you right here. Archaeology has now proven that the statement of the Bible in Daniel 5:22 is, in fact, true. We know that from some of the material that's been dug up from the empire at that time in history. Nebuchadnezzar had a daughter. I always forget the daughters, don't they? The daughter of Nebuchadnezzar was married to Nabonidus. That was his wife, which means that she was the mother of Belshazzar. So while Nebuchadnezzar was not the father of Belshazzar on his father's side, he was the son of Nebuchadnezzar on his mother's side. And that's where all of the historians have gone wrong. They made a big mistake. Now, you think, well, that wouldn't be the son of Nebuchadnezzar, that'd be the grandson. Well, remember, you're reading the way they communicated at that time. Even though we would call Belshazzar the son of Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible, it says, or the grandson, the Bible says he is the son. Okay, they spoke differently than we did. The son, every son that came, Evil Merodach was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. So was his son. So was his son. So was Belshazzar, the son of Nebuchadnezzar. That's the way they spoke of their families, unlike us. We got grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, and so on and so forth. They just have they're all sons. But this is what they've demonstrated, what they claim to be an error in the Bible. On the internet, you'll see it if you look at that stuff. It's not right. We know from archaeological discoveries from, I think it was in the 70s, that that's not the case at all. The Bible's right. Anyway, circumstances are described in Daniel 5 that has to do with the fall of Babylon. Isaiah 13 also, and Isaiah chapter 45 deals with the fall of Babylon. Babylon was one of the greatest cities of all the earth. It was absolutely amazing. It was fortified in such a way that the walls were impenetrable. There was a river that ran through the middle of the city, so they had a constant water supply. They had enough food to lay up, keep them sustained for years. They had herds and things inside the city. They could raise their meats or whatever. There was, the city could virtually shut down like a turtle does, and it would be safe from any outside attacks. Well, the Persians came up against the city of Babylon. They were going to conquer it. Well, the Babylonians weren't afraid of it at all. As a matter of fact, on this particular night, Belshazzar had a bunch of people in. There was hundreds, maybe thousands of people. They were having a big party, and everybody got drunk. I mean, the whole city was having this big old party. They were drinking, they were having a big time, and all the people got drunk. And you know what that's like when you get drunk. Well, maybe, or at least you've seen one. At any rate, Cyrus, the king of the Persians, he came up with an idea. And his idea was he would reroute the river. He would change its course. He would back up somewhere, some space away from the city, and he would dig another river, a trench, for the river to follow. Well, and that's what he did. On this particular night, they opened up the space that allowed the course of the river to change and go in a different direction. Well, when the river changed courses and went off that way, that left what? A big old hole right in the wall of the city. So what did the Persians do? They walked right through that hole. And they took that city while everybody was drunk. They were so secure, they thought. They were so secure. And something happened that they never dreamed could happen in a million years. The Persians walked into the city, and nobody even knew they were there until they were on top of them. Daniel says that very night Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain. Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. I said Cyrus, I'm sorry. It was Darius. This was probably one of the greatest military strategies that ever took place, was diverting the flow of that river and walking through the hole in the wall. But the Medes did it, the Medes and the Persians, they did it, and they conquered the city of Babylon. In his book, His Truth Endures, Muir refers to the Nabonidus Chronicles. These were discovered in excavation in Babylon. That's what makes archaeology such a great thing. That's why you want to always check on what's going on with Apologetics Press. When these new archaeological finds are found, they usually report it, and you can kind of stay on top of the new things that's coming up. Anyway, this is what the Nabonidus Chronicles had to say about that night. The suddenness of the attack and the taking of the city without a battle. That's from the point of view of the Babylonians. They just walked in and took over, just like that. The greatest empire on earth, with the greatest army known to man, was defeated without a battle. In their stupor, they were defeated. They thought they were mighty. They thought they were powerful. They thought they were indestructible. They were very confident that they were superior to every other nation on earth. Starting to sound familiar? And then in one night, they were defeated without a battle. Pride goes before a fall. But that's a little of the background of the Babylonian Empire as it relates to the Scriptures. Secondly, a look at the Persian Empire. This was it's the Medo-Persian Empire, actually. The Medes and the Persians joined forces, and they made this great nation. The Medes, at first, when they first combined their efforts, the Medes was the greater of the two. It was more powerful than the Persians, and it was referred to as the Medo-Persian Empire. Well, as time changes, the Persians became more powerful than the Medes, and the empire simply became known as the Persian Empire. And that little detail, which is well known in history, that little detail isn't overlooked in the book of Daniel. For example, in the beginning of Daniel's book, he referred to the Medes and the Persians. But then at the end of his book, he's writing about the Persians and the Medes. Okay? Very little detail that would be so easy to overlook, but it's captured in the book of Daniel. Again, one more note for divine inspiration. Babylon was conquered by the Persians under Cyrus in 538 BC. Cyrus, the Persian king, he was an exceptionally great king. He was different than all the other kings. He was very different than all the other kings. There was it's called an unwritten rule, the way a conquering nation would treat its new subjects. They all basically did the same thing. Most of the time they were very hard on their new subjects. They would go in, they would conquer them. They might not necessarily make them all slaves, but they treated them very harshly. They taxed them through the roof, and they were brutal to them. They beat them, and they mistreated them. They were inferior to the conquering nation. That was the unwritten rule of the kings. That all stops with Cyrus. Cyrus doesn't think that way. He's different. He doesn't want to conquer and then be the conquerors over the conquered. His logic was to conquer the nation and then make friends out of everybody. Instead of having a nation within a nation, his logic was conquer and make one greater nation, all subjects being equal to one another. So everything changed with Cyrus. The way the Jews, for example, were going to be treated would improve over what the Babylonians had done. Now Nebuchadnezzar, he was better than his predecessors in that he allowed the Jews to basically live together in the city of Babylon. There was the community of the Jews, which was something different. The Assyrians, for example, they dispersed people in all parts of the earth, scatter them. That way they can't unite and they can't be a threat against your government. Well, when Nebuchadnezzar conquered the Jews, he permitted the Jews to remain together, to form a community of believers. And basically that's what they did. When you get to Cyrus, he's going to make everybody equal to each other. You can watch as its conditions improve over the years. And remember what God said. He raises kings, he lowers kings. He raises them according to his purposes. He lowers them according to his purposes. When the fullness of the time had come. As you go back, one of the things that's interesting to study is the history of the Bible. It's really fascinating because you can see the hand of God all over it, preparing the world and the people for the coming of the Messiah. Remember, one thing that's happening during this time, for example, during the time of the Babylonians and now during the time of the Persians, is that these people are now coming into contact with God's people. So they're learning about the God of heaven from the Jewish peoples. When it comes time for the Christ, you remember that Jesus was born, and then probably 1 year later at least, the wise men from the Far East, remember the Far East, well, how did they know about all this stuff? Well, it's their exposure to the Jews for the past couple hundred years. The Jews are now living in the Far East, okay? And when the Christ is born, they see the star. It takes about a year, but those wise men, they're called the Magi, they finally come to the Christ. And you got to ask, well, why would they be looking for him in the first place? And again, that goes to their exposure to the Jews and especially to the prophets. But while all this is happening, these nations are coming into contact with the people of God and, of course, with God himself. When the fullness of the time had come, God is getting the world ready for the coming of his Son. Isaiah prophesied in the years somewhere between 740 and 681. He said, "The Lord says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd. He shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be rebuilt, and to the temple, your foundation shall be laid." God calls Cyrus, a pagan king, his shepherd. Well, Ted and I are God's shepherds. And here he calls a pagan king his shepherd. Well, obviously he's using the word shepherd in two different meanings in each context. Here, Cyrus is God's shepherd because he's going to shepherd his people. He's going to be the leader of his people, and he's going to lead the Lamb of God back into Jerusalem. So he's referring to Cyrus, who he will raise sometime in the future, and he will perform all my pleasure, rebuilding the city of Jerusalem, which during Isaiah's days, remember, Jerusalem hasn't even fallen yet. The temple was still standing. But Isaiah, they thought was a nut. He was prophesying the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the rebuilding of the temple. And here the people are looking at the city and the temple. They didn't know what to think of the prophet. The prophecy was made sometime between those years, about 60 years there. The fulfillment of it was in the year 536 BC. That's when Cyrus, actually he made a decree in 535 that all captives could return to their native lands. And in 536, he loosed the Jews. He let the Jews return to Jerusalem. It's somewhere between 150 and 250 years earlier is when Isaiah prophesied that these events would come to pass. He made his prophecy, and it was at least 150 years later before the prophecy was fulfilled. The only way Isaiah could have said what he said was if he was speaking by divine inspiration. That's how you prove the inspiration of the Bible. There's no way he could have predicted what was going to happen. I can't predict what's going to happen in 150 years. I can't say, when Joe Blow is raised up, he's going to rebuild the United States, and instead of putting the capital in Washington, D.C., he's going to put the capital in Nashville, Tennessee. And this be an event that's going to take place 150 years from now. Something like that could quite possibly happen. I don't know it. I have no way of knowing it. But Isaiah did. He prophesied it. The implication is Jerusalem will fall. And eventually the people will come back, because this man Cyrus, who is shepherding God's people, he's going to make it possible for them to come back, build a city, and rebuild the temple. The only way Isaiah could have known that is by divine inspiration. Thus says the Lord, this is again Isaiah, thus says the Lord to his anointed. You know what that word means in English? Christ. That's what the word anoint means. You've got the word Messiah. You got the word Christ, and then you have the word anointed. That's the English word. He is God's ordained, just like Christ was. Christ was ordained to come into the world to die for the sins of men. Cyrus is being ordained to be led by God to bring about the deliverance of his people. He is a servant of God. He's spoken of as a servant of God in the same sense that you and I are. But he is a pagan who doesn't even know the name Jehovah. And yet God speaks of him in this sense. When you study the Bible, you've got to keep those things in mind. It's so important. Or you can misunderstand what's being talked about. You may read the word anointed. You may read the word shepherd. You may read the words my servant. In any given context, it happens all the time. But you have got to look at the context in which God is speaking. Is he speaking of Cyrus being his shepherd, his anointed, in the same sense as he would a faithful disciple? And the answer is obviously not. He's a pagan. God would never call a pagan his servant, his shepherd, in the same sense he would us. Nevertheless, he did speak of them in that sense, that they're going to do that type of work on his behalf. Okay? So you've got to understand the context. Or you're going to get into a Bible class and you're going to have a great argument because this word's there, and this word means, when you say shepherd, it means an elder over God's people. Well, maybe it does sometimes, and maybe it doesn't sometimes. When you talk about God's anointed, it may be speaking about the Christ. It may not be speaking about the Christ. You have got to look at the context. And this is where so many people make mistakes. Anyway, about Cyrus. I've grasped him by the right hand. Why? To subdue nations before him. Drop the nations in his way. To loose the belts of kings. He's going to have a greater empire than Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. To open doors before him that gates may not be closed. He's going to be like a bulldozer moving across the earth. Kingdom after kingdom are going to fall before him. Why? Because God's got him by the hand. He's leading him all the way through. I will go before you, Cyrus, and level the exalted places. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. When the Persians captured Babylon, of course, set up residence there in the city, Cyrus is now king, and guess who one of his subjects are? Daniel and other prophets. You got the prophet Ezekiel. He's there as well. It appears that what happened was that these men who were exalted, had exalted positions in government, showed Cyrus, these prophecies. 150 years ago, here's what our God had to say. And now Cyrus is reading that Jehovah took him by the hand, because he started out as a little fella, and now he's basically king of a big chunk of the earth. God took him by the hand and made all these things possible. And Cyrus was so moved by that, by the fact that the God of the Jewish people led him to the position that he held right now, that he not only loosed them to go back to Jerusalem, he gave them money. He made the people in Babylon give them money. He made the kings in all the various provinces give them money to rebuild everything, because they didn't have any money. And they had some, but not enough to rebuild an entire city. So Cyrus the king issued a decree to all the various kings that they had to supply whatever the Jews needed to build their city, and then finally to build their temple. And that's where all the funds came from. But it was because of Cyrus and Cyrus's exposure to the writings of Isaiah the prophet. I will give you the treasures of darkness and hoards in secret places. Why? That you may know, Cyrus. I want you to know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls you by your name 150 years earlier, for the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel, my chosen. I call you by your name. I name you, even though you do not know me. Okay? Why did God do these things? He wanted Cyrus to know that it was the God of Israel that made all of his victories possible. Cyrus knew it. He knew the name Jehovah now, and he would never forget it again. And he did everything God wanted him to do, fulfilled all the prophecies that God had decreed. The Jewish people was the only nation that was treated that way. All nations were treated as friends, but all nations weren't giving the necessary funds to rebuild their city. Cyrus ruled for 10 years. He died in the year 529. Camses, his son, then became king. He died 7 years later. And then Darius the Great. This is not the Darius of Daniel chapter 5. Darius the Great then came to power. He was a magnificent military genius. He wanted to conquer the earth, and he almost did. He extended the empire from India to the Danube and eastward all the way to Greece. I mean, if you look on a map, he conquered a big chunk of the world, all the way over to India. He didn't attempt to take India. India is the kind of a place that's hard to conquer. They didn't have a centralized form of government like all civilized nations did. We have all of our leadership is in Washington, D.C., okay? Each nation has a centralized location for their government. India didn't have that. They're tribal by nature, and each of their tribes has a president. So if you conquer 10 tribes over here in the northern part of India, which you could do, an empire like the Persian Empire could certainly do it, but then you haven't conquered the nation. You've got to conquer more tribes. The other tribes aren't going to surrender just because 10 tribes fell. And then you go back and you conquer the next 10 tribes, and what's happened? The first 10 tribes have now rebuilt. You've got to go back and conquer them again. It's almost an unwinnable situation, because you can't just go in and take out the head. There isn't a head. They're all autonomous to each other, and they don't fall. So Darius, he didn't even attempt to take India. Later on, the Greeks under Alexander the Great will make that attempt to take India, but he'll fail in the process. It's just a place that you can't hardly beat.
It says that these kings, these rulers, Darius and Cyrus, and had 127 provinces that
Ruled over, yeah.
what was it?
Those would be nations. What we would think of as countries.
127 countries.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, they just, like Cyrus, I mean, he conquered everything, every nation in his way before he got to Babylon. Because before he had conquered all these previous nations, he was in no position to go up against Babylon. Babylon was a mighty empire. I mean, it was, I think the city of Babylon was considered one of the 7 wonders of the world, or the 9th wonder, or whatever. But it was a magnificent nation, and even though the Medes and the Persians had joined forces, they still were in no position to take Babylon. It was too big. But you go through and you take out 127 provinces or nations, and now you're becoming quite a bit bigger. You're still not as big as Babylon, but when you divert the river and walk in through the hole in the wall, and everybody's drunk when you get inside there, it's not nearly as hard to take the nation, and that's what happened. And it was due to their pride. Part of it was due to the Babylonian pride. I don't know if Cyrus hadn't come up with the idea. He may have been inspired by God. I'm sure he was some way or another. If he hadn't come up with the idea of diverting the river, they never would have taken that city or that country. But India was just one of those places. Darius had enough sense to stay out of it. He went east to Greece, and that's what he focused on, Greece. He wanted Greece. He wanted to take Greece so bad he could taste it. Had he defeated Greece, everything would have changed. Everything would have changed. I mean, it would affect us today if the Persians had defeated Greece. The world we live in today would be entirely different than it is right now. And that's what Darius, he wanted Greece, boy. I mean, he wanted it bad, like a dog chomping on a bone. He commanded the governors, Darius did, to aid in the rebuilding of the temple. The governors in some of those provinces around Jerusalem, they started bucking up. They're tired of giving them all their money. And Darius issued an order, told them to get back, give them the money they request, and get that temple rebuilt. So he also was a friend of the Jews, obviously influenced by his grandfather and the fact that his grandfather's name appeared in the Holy Scriptures. His eyes, as I mentioned, were on Greece. That's what he wanted to take, and he tried. For the rest of his life, he tried to take Greece. There was the Battle of 492, in which the Persians were defeated. There was the battle at Marathon in 490 BC. Again, they were defeated. Darius was preparing for a third battle, but before he got into position to try to take Greece a third time, he died. Okay? So it looked like there would be no attempt to take Greece again, except for the fact that Xerxes, in the Bible, he's called Ahasuerus, in the book of Esther. Xerxes, his son, said, I'm going to finish what my daddy started. So he decided he'd finish up, get ready for the battle, and go and take Greece. They fought the Battle of Salamis in 480, and they were beaten bad that time. The Persians were. They were beaten to the bone. And he decided, forget it. He went back to Babylon and said, forget it. I don't need this place that bad. They couldn't beat the Greeks. Providence of God, thank God they didn't beat the Greeks, but it's very fortunate that it's got to be the providence of God, no doubt about it, because God wanted the Greeks to come to power, because the Greeks were going to contribute a lot to humanity that would contribute to the coming of God's Son. There's a number of things, but one of the most important things of all was the Greek language. It's the best language for communicating thoughts that's ever been devised by humankind. There's no better language in all the earth. Now, we're talking about Koine Greek. You could think of it as street Greek. It's a much, much better language than English. English is a very hard language. It's for a person, a foreigner, trying to learn the English language. It's like trying to get a hold of Jell-O and keep it from falling to the floor, because we'll have one word that's got 10 different meanings, and it's so hard to understand the language, first of all, and then it's so hard to communicate with people. I've been writing some materials for our bulletin, whatever, and when you sit down to write and you're trying to get the thoughts out of your head and into the head of another person, it's hard. It's very, very hard to do. Oh boy. The little bulletin I write, for example, that we have here, it'll take at least 2 full days for me to write that. I can write a sermon in the Bible class quicker than I can a bulletin article. When you're trying to transmit thoughts from your mind to another person's mind, you have to be careful with each word you use, because this word could be misunderstood by the reader, because it also has other meanings. So instead of using a word, you may have to use a phrase. You may have to explain it, because we don't have a word that would explain it. The Greek language isn't that way. It's the very opposite of that. It's probably the easiest language there is to learn is Koine Greek. It's not hard at all, because it's very simple. And that language would become universal, and then when the apostles and others, how yourself? When the apostles and others would go out and preach the gospel, they most often spoke in the Greek language, which most of the earth was familiar with.